Welcome to everyone who is joining us for today's webinar. Before we start, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're meeting. I myself am on Bunurong country in southeastern Victoria in Australia, and I want to recognise that these have always been lands where learning has taken place through storytelling and the sharing experiences, and we pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. That's why we're here today, to listen to some people, to tell us some stories, to share their experiences, and so that we can all grow our collective wisdom around this great topic around climate-related disclosure standards, green bonds, and sustainability-linked loans. This is a really, really huge area that we're covering today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what all of our experts have to say. So as I said, we're going to be diving into new climate-related disclosure standards that are coming out, green bonds, sustainability-linked loans, how they're converging to put real financial and operational pressure on the property sector. This is a really big change that's happening because we're no longer talking about ESG intentions, but we're about looking at measurable risk-weighted performance. So we're going to explore how these instruments are shifting from being just good citizenship tools into financial levers that put operations at the heart of proving long-term value and resilience. So with that today, we're going to start off with an introduction by CIM CEO, co-CEO David Wright. And then we're going to move into a panel discussion with Lucie, the Director of Sustainability and Reporting and Assurance at PwC, and Elham Monavari, the Head of Green Star Strategic Delivery at the Green Building Council of Australia. If you look into the chat, you're going to find some bios for all of our speakers today, so you can learn a bit more about them and about our host today, CIM. If you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function to pop those in, and you'll see those in the software that we have today. You'll see that there's a Q&A function for your questions. Please take the opportunity to use that, but also let us know who the question is for. So if you do have something specific for either Lucie, Elham or David, please just let us know who the question's for. There's also a poll that's going to be running through the whole webinar, and you'll see that up there on the toolbar as well. So you'll see there's a poll and quizzes thing there. Please click on that and fill in the poll. You'll see that there on your screen. It's a pretty easy poll, just 5 options to choose from in a multiple choice about over the next 5 years, where is the property sector most at risk of falling short on ESG, and just pick one of those options that's there. So that'll be available to you. Please make sure that you have a crack at that for us. And very finally, at the end of today's webinar, there will be a quick post-webinar survey when we finish up. Please help us by filling that in. We do a lot of these webinars and they're always great value to everybody. We want to keep getting better and we want to keep looking for what it is that you are looking for through these webinars. So with all of that, it's my pleasure to hand over to CIM's co-CEO, David Wright, and he's going to kick things off. Welcome, David.
Thank you. I'll just share the couple of slides, which hopefully won't bore people too much. I've only got a few minutes to get at the start. So the first thing is to say welcome to everyone who's attending today. We know it's a time out of your day, and hopefully you find this useful. We love contributing to our clients' ESG efforts, and I'd say it's kind of one of 2 reasons why the company was formed about 10 years ago. Today, we want to share a bit of what we are seeing over those 10 years, but also more specifically what's happening now, and hear from a couple of experts in the field to share their insights. So to pause for a second, we believe we're actually at a tipping point in the value of ESG efforts. When talking about ESG, the conversation nearly always starts with the E in ESG, and that's a great place to start. The work that has been done over the past few years in reducing emissions and moving towards climate targets has been incredible, and no one should undervalue the work that's been done. But now we believe the leaders are talking a lot more about the G in ESG. It's about governance. It's about having a system that ensures that assets are lower risk and will achieve higher returns. It's great for property owners, investors, of course, but it's also supported in the topic today by sustainability-linked loan financiers. So to just step back a second to think, where are we on the journey of sustainability? The way we look at it, there's been basically 4 waves of sustainability. So the first was about commitment. This is incredibly important. Commitment to change is the first start, recognizing there's a problem and something to be achieved, and a lot of work went into ambitious targets. Then it was about transparency, actually measuring the data, working out what was happening, reporting on that data, and seeing what's actually happening versus what had been committed. Today, there's a lot more shift to real time, to action in meeting KPIs, being more proactive and preventative. This is where a lot of best practice is today, and we refer to that internally as building health. So that's looking at how to make assets healthy today. Where we think it's going is about how to make assets healthy in the future. So this is about autonomously optimizing how things are run. Yeah, we can use the term AI to deal with that. We're an AI native company, so we can speak about that all day, but we try not to sometimes. But it's really about the system, about being systematic, more efficient, lower risk, and ultimately a higher sustainable value of assets. Sustainability-linked loan financiers are providing clear signals, we believe, on what they consider to be minimum standards to attract the better term. And as we said there, this is about minimum standards, not maximum standards. The sustainability loan financiers give a lot of breadth, and there's a conversation between the company and the financier about what they consider to be the most important things. But they're not trying to cap it. They're just trying to say, these are the kind of characteristics that will attract better terms for us today. And that leaves a lot more to happen. So, of course, there's a financial impact of that. And so better sustainability-linked loan terms give you certain financial outcomes. One of them is getting access to the finance, and we can talk a little bit about that later. The second is that the range of margin based on what you're able to achieve is quite broad. Between 5 and 20 basis points is a significant amount of money. It could be anywhere between $500,000 and $2 million per annum just in how you've dealt with that. Of course, on the other side, when you're making commitments, if you don't meet them, then their penalties can apply to that, and so it can go in the negative sense. But ultimately, this is about positive change. So to get the best outcomes for sustainability loans, we look at something to say if it's more sustainable, it's better governed, it's lower risk, and it'll achieve better sustainability linked terms. So we know about things like emissions reduction targets and how they become predictable reduction targets. You want to be predictable if you're committing to a certain future cash flow based on a margin or trying to achieve things. It's about the governance and governance framework and loan requirements that are in a lot of the documents and how you actually show that you're meeting those. It's about transparency and audit and also forecasting requirements. There's a definite need from the sustainability linked loan providers and others to understand more about the data and what's actually happening to be able to forecast what it might look at when they're trying to profile companies. And then, and we've got a great participant on our panel today, the active management of ratings and certifications and other things become incredibly important as sustainability loan providers see independent verification as something that they will tie to the green discounts or the margins that they're having and seeing that. So what does this look like in practice? So in practice, things that were not done before are now starting to be done. So it's not about delayed checks, waiting for things to be broken and things like that within buildings. It's about going from thousands to literally billions of checks. This is what real-time management and governance looks like. But just knowing about problems and being actionable insights is also not where the market is going today. They're talking about active management of resolving actions easily, early, cheaply, and of course correctly out of those sorts of things. This is what drives us today, but it's also we are being driven by our clients to go further and further in this direction. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. And the best bit about that is not only was it super informative, but we are a little bit ahead of schedule, which gives us more time for our panel discussion, which is really the most important part of what we're here to do today, and it's to share the knowledge and wisdom of all three of our panelists. So with that, you've already met David through his presentation. He's going to be joined by Lucie Knorr, the Director of Sustainability Reporting and Assurance at PwC, and Elham Monavari, the Head of Green Star Strategic Delivery at the Green Building Council of Australia. Thanks everybody for joining us. Let's kick this off. We're going to start by just looking a little bit about the shift that's happening in ESG, particularly with the intentions towards accountability. So with the new mandatory climate-related financial disclosure framework that's coming into effect, the AASB, what are some of the most immediate challenges and opportunities that are out there for property owners and investors?
There's quite a lot, if I am honest. I think there's sort of probably three groups of challenges if I talk to them first. Firstly, resources, having to work out internally how this is going to be dealt with, funded, who's going to be dedicated to doing this, because it is a fundamental shift in the way that we're actually looking at sustainability reporting climate in the first instance. Capability building. We do not have enough sustainability professionals who understand this anywhere in the world, really, that we need. So the question of, are you hiring people from external? Are you building up people internally? There's a lot of question there around that capability building to be able to tackle these problems. And David, not going to be surprised with what he's sort of said previously, but data is probably the other big one. So, to get to the outcome of getting your first sustainability report that meets the mandatory requirements under ASSB S2 out, all three of those things, resources dedicated to achieving it, having the internal capability to get to the outcome, and having the data that can support those disclosures are really critical. And to be honest, it's not straightforward. It's not easy. This is new for a lot of people. If you've had sustainability people working on this for a long time, you're probably now having finance people involved, operations people involved, legal. It's a brand new world, and getting people up the curve and really also matching it with working out your ambition internally and getting everyone on the same page in terms of what you actually want to do here, because it is a disclosure regime. So you might say we don't want to do much. Or you might have investors that are really hungry for you to do quite a lot. So you have to work that out as well. On the opportunity side, again, not surprising, data is really critical and can be something where you can actually get quite a lot of insights out of tackling this problem. At the end of the day, this is all about understanding and managing your climate risks and opportunities. And so if you have the right information and you're able to look at this as something that can provide you with insights, not just compliance exercise on disclosing this risk, then you're actually going to be in a better place for going, hang on, we now have something that shines a light on data in this circumstance, or we need to actually understand the risks that are inside our business better and prepare to do the activities that help you mitigate the risk or to actually enhance your ability to go after the opportunities.
Yeah, it's that old business rule, the old business maxim from Peter Drucker, is that you can't manage what you don't measure.
100%.
And in order to measure it, you've got to have the right tools to actually go out and do that, which is something that we're now able to do with far more depth and accuracy and granularity as well, so that we have a much better understanding about what's going on. So there are frameworks out there like Green Star that support organizations in aligning their disclosure requirements for measurable performance. How do those frameworks actually help?
So that was a really great introduction. Thanks, Lucie and David. And yeah, so a little bit about, I thought maybe what I'll do is I'll just touch very briefly on the Green Building Council. I'm assuming a lot of the people that have joined in know a little bit about us, but our purpose is to lead the sustainable transformation of the built environment. And in addition to Green Star, we do other things, which I'm raising them because it does tie into this particular question. So we collaborate and we collaborate across industry, but also we collaborate internationally. So when it comes to sustainable finance, that's a really important component. And so through the rating tools that we have, Green Star, we effectively use a lot of the information and the data to try and certify. So that independent verification, which is something that David touched on earlier on, is something that Green Star is known for. It is a holistic rating tool. With the future focus being the newer rating tools, they have all been aligned to ensure that they're meeting the needs and what needs to happen over the next, over the critical decade. And so it does do that by looking at the local and international context as well. So for example, the collaboration that I spoke about earlier on, if you're using Neighbours, which was one of the the tools that David raised earlier on, the GBCA, Green Building Council of Australia, has had a very long established relationship with Neighbours. And if people are using Neighbours, that does help them, for example, to meet up to 27 points within the Green Star Performance version 2 rating tool. So that industry, I think collaboration and engagement is really important. As part of the development of the rating tools, we also sit down and make sure that our requirements are also matching and meeting data disclosure and reporting requirements. So Green Star Performance version 2, for example, has been aligned to investor and sustainable finance frameworks. And so, for example, it meets all of the impact categories of the EU taxonomy, and it complies with all the requirements for green bonds, green loans, social bonds, and social loans. So it essentially means that through us working with other organizations like the Australian Sustainable Finance Institute, we ensure that we're informing also the development of those taxonomies, and that was released earlier this year in July. So really pleasing to know that within that the ASFI, the Australian Sustainable Taxonomy, that Green Star is referenced as a proxy within that framework. So it essentially means that it gives the property sector confidence that if they certify using Green Star, that they know that they're aligned to those taxonomy requirements. And similarly, the finance sector can have confidence that when they see a Green Star certificate, that it meets all of their sort of expectations for a credible green labeled finance. So yeah, it's kind of like win-win on both angles.
That's good. Everyone loves a win-win.
And I guess, you know, like it's also ensuring that, you know, ultimately what the rating tool does is it takes these global frameworks and it tries to break them down into what are the practical things that projects can do, but it also measures it. And then you have that verification that confirms everything. So I guess that's how we know. And we've done further studies after certifications to say that, you know, the impact is actually being delivered. And that's ultimately what that Green Star brand means.
And as an auditor, can I just say it's a lot easier to audit something that's got the credentials like a Green Star sitting behind it, where I know what that means, a reader of the report knows what that means, and it's an easy reference point for people rather than someone coming up with their own categorization of what is a green building.
So when we look at the way buildings are being run, what are some of the market leaders out there doing well to turn those ESG intentions into actual accountable outcomes? And what are some of the gaps that are being addressed out there?
Well, I guess one way of looking at a building or a portfolio, even more so, is it's like a financial market. There's lots of participants. Some of those people are staff, some of those people are suppliers, vendors, equipment, all sorts of things. But there's lots of events and transactions and things happening every day. So there's a lot of complexity around that. And we see the best operators running that kind of complexity. They're changing that by actually designing their own operations like it's a marketplace. It's very, they look at things like transparency and things being efficient and fair and predictable as part of what they're doing. They're looking much more at the system rather than a whole stack of siloed activity which has different sort of capabilities in it. This means that it has to be really well governed, because you know you're trying to build something that produces an outcome that's predictable. But it's also about things like active risk management and collaboration between people and making sure those types of things work in a really effective way. So the kind of gaps you see for it, and we're obviously covering a very large part of the Australian market and many of the highest rated buildings, is the movement to what we're talking about. It's actually a change process as much as anything. And so what we see as gaps, and Lucie mentioned this before, a lot of it is around having great people who are capable and knowledgeable, who are authorized and accountable for that change. And so we commonly see a client who might say, I want to be X, I want to be data-driven, predictive, meet all my ESG requirements. But then you look at it and say, well, what's your system for predictably doing that? Ordering, measuring, monitoring, verifying that those things are actually happening. Where is that? And the first cab that we always look for is, do they have the people? Do they have a person? It doesn't need to be one person. It can be a person with advisors and groups, but there's a committed group of people who are accountable for that type of action. The second thing we see is really about maturity of the data side. There's a big myth in property, and that is that you don't have data. you have to go and create it. We don't believe that. There's a lot of data. There's way more data out there, but managing that data in a way that you can create a well-governed system that tells you the right things, that coordinates things, allows you to compare between one thing and the other, report in multiple systems. It's a big lift for a lot of organizations. Many of the people in the industry, it has not been that long ago that they really weren't investing a lot in the data capabilities of those companies. They are now, and they've got some really great people in it, but it is a change process, and that data management goes through cycles where at the start you can have the notion that I have to build big things myself and I have to own them all myself, or what we refer to internally as a kind of BYO system. We see those types of things, that there's a capability gap today, but also the reaction to that capability gap can be very expensive, low value systems that are incredibly hard for anyone to interrogate and get results out of. And so the technology's improved a long way to do that, but you need maturity and people to help you to be able to make those calls. We just see this happen over and over again. We had periods of a digital twin and big data lakes and all these other things that happened. The majority of those were written off as very expensive outcomes, and underneath it, you miss the benefit of being really great with that data and understanding that. The last thing I'd say is there's a lot of, when we look at something like ESG as an example, it can be pigeonholed within the organization in a silo. So it can be in the ESG team or in the finance team if they have a sustainability linked loan, or it can be an operation in the operations teams. But actually it applies in many ways across the whole organization. And so being able to break down those silos to say, hey, if I have a system that's about ensuring the sustainability against risks, is that relevant to my insurance? Is that relevant to what piece of equipment I should buy? Is that relevant to what partners I want to work with? The answer is yes, but what we see is that that information and that knowledge is often trapped within parts of organizations.
That's a really great segue, David, to the next little area that we want to talk about, which is some of the drivers of sustainable finance, and what some, you were talking about also the drivers towards insurance and other important tools that are out there. But from a property owner perspective, what discussions with owners and developers are pushing them to pursue sustainability linked loans, which is a bit of a tongue twister. Let's face it, we should just call them SLLs from now on.
Oh my God, there's already so many acronyms.
More acronyms is good. What's pushing people towards those SLLs over traditional financing?
Look, the GBCA, and I'll just jump in to maybe start us off in answering these questions. We say that we are for industry and made by industry. So we have a lot of conversations with industry. All of our rating tools are developed in close collaboration and engagement with industry. So I would say, look, the things that we've heard certainly over the last few years is, when we started developing some of our rating tools, everyone knew and understood the scale of the challenge, right? So there needs to be a significant change for buildings to upgrade to meet a lot of the new, the new strategic requirements that are coming at them. So with a lot of these trends underway, it's helpful to have sustainability or SLLs to help them along the way. Like David talked about some of the benefits through reduced sort of rates and more preferential requirements in place. All of this has really been one of the main drivers. It's really meant that there's been a significant growth within the real estate sector and being able to access sustainable finance as well. So I can say that from a Green Star point of view, there's a lot of our cohort that use Green Star and Green Star Performance, we've seen it upgrade and an increase over time in their performance. It's really important for this, though, to ensure that finance is actually directed to projects and buildings that really need it as well. One of the main benefits of Green Star Performance has been that, and the purpose of that program has been to try and lift the kind of the middle, because with the other rating tool, we often did target a lot of the top tier. And so the purpose of that, of Green Star Performance, is to lift everyone up, all the other building types together. And it is something that is a demonstration of change over time. So this is where the sustainable loans can come into play, because it means that a lot of the upgrades that are going to be needed. So for example, as we look at that sort of each project needing to have their net zero and their decarbonisation strategy in place, there needs to be over time upgrades to plant and equipment, and having access to sustainable linked loans is a way that it makes that available to greater number of projects. So it can actually lift everyone up, moving forward. So I would sort of say that that's been one of the main things that we've heard from industry, and they're actively seeking those opportunities and options out as well.
Thanks, Elham. I'll just remind our viewers and listeners that are out there today that if you do have a question for one of our panelists today, please pop them into the Q&A, and we will do our very, very best to get to everyone's questions as they come through. Now, we've kind of heard about the property owner perspective there, but what about for investors? What's motivating investors and financiers to integrate sustainability metrics more deeply into their decision making?
I think there's a lot of different answers to that question. Again, if I talk about...
You've got 2 minutes, so can you give us all of them?
Okay. I mean, firstly, they themselves are going to be captured under the mandatory reporting legislation, so they need the information to be able to enable their own disclosures. But also, if we take the disclosure side out of it, they're making their own commitments and targets, and they want to have information that can enable them to actually reach their targets. So whether that's, them just saying we're going to finance X percentage that's got the green ratings, or, let's be honest, they're also looking for new opportunities to offer new products. And so this is an area where there is huge growth and there is huge opportunity for them. So there's a real positive side of things to it. There is also a pure sort of risk management play here. Like the mandatory reporting, all of this stuff has come out of, now Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, and the co from the TCFD saying we think there might be a systemic risk in the way we're pricing risk globally because we're not accounting for climate risk and others. So for them, it's really about being able to sort of make sure that they're matching their ambitions and getting those returns to the level that they're expecting. So, if you're a super fund, you're investing for a much longer period of time, you probably want to know how your building or other investment, green investment, is going to perform over a longer period of time, because that's the time horizon that you're actually looking at from a risk perspective. Shorter term, maybe it's a bit different, but you are still wanting to get returns on your investment, and they see this as a way of managing other risks. Yeah, there is also, of all of the industries that have been sort of come really heavily so far under the greenwashing sort of idea of making sure that disclosures and what they're saying they're doing is actually happening, they are the ones that have been penalised so far as an investor group in terms of not having had good controls around information and not being able to sort of demonstrate that the green label that they've gone out with is necessarily underpinned by solid performance. So having more information, more metrics that really support them, it does offer them opportunities, but it also does help from a risk management perspective.
Yeah, it sounds like, from what you've said, Lucie, and what we've heard from the other panelists, that, the data matters. Like you've got to collect the data, you've got to know what you're doing with it, you've got to analyze it correctly, and you've got to turn it, not just get it as look, right now I know something, but turn it into something actionable so that you can deliver an outcome that's, good for investors, good for tenants, good for property owners, good for everybody. So around that then, what are some of the broader benefits that sustainability linked finance can deliver? We talk about resilience, exposure to risk. What other things are out there?
Look, one thing I think we all recognise is that ESG and sustainability linked loans isn't just about finance. So the financier provides some benefits in doing that, but the ecosystem of financiers and investors is very tightly connected. Investors, clients, tenants, staff, they all see that through acquiring a sustainability linked loan, it's just a visible thing that they see as a strong verification of the direction that the company is going. And what it tells people is that this company is very serious about ESG. They share their values, they're making a positive impact, but also they're contributing to their goals. So they're contributing to an investor's goal or a staff member's goal or a financier's goal, as well as their own as part of it. The other part of it, we've talked a fair bit about this, is that it does show that that company takes governance very, very seriously. So they're well governed, they're lower risk, they're better informed about things that happen. So one way of looking at sustainability generally, it's about protecting your future as much as it is about what you do at the moment. And so what things are you doing to mitigate risks that happen in the future, but also advance the value of the company in the future? And it shows that you are making actions in that area. And you're dealing with things not just about climate, but it could be about market sentiment, could be regulatory costs that are going to come around the corner, could be stranded assets. So for some clients, when they go down this path of looking at the future, looking at their governance, understanding their data, one of the first things they do is they see a different future themselves, and they now have an ability to react to that early. So they can see, we're going to have stranded assets here and we need to do something about that. And so investors and staff want to see that you are doing that. Creating that better future is an incredibly important part. I shouldn't undersell either that, we had a saying that started off that we were driven a lot as a company around making an impact in climate from the built environment. But we also know that our clients need to return money to investors as well. And overwhelmingly, companies that invest in this perform better over time. And so that's been proven now. People know that, and they want to see evidence that you're up at that level. It's a competitive market, but it's also something that they want to see action. And last and not least at all is, there's still businesses, as much as we're a technology company, we're about software, it's still a business full of people. And you want to have organizations that are great places to work because they stand for things and they're well run, and they're great places to work with if you're a partner or something along those lines. And they see that very visibly in this. There is increasingly in sustainability linked loans what you might call a kind of reinforced honesty. It's the better you do, the better you will do in terms of margins. The more governed you are, the better access you have to these types of things. These are all positive reinforcements that are happening, but it also makes for a very high performing and great place to work and work with.
Thanks, David. Now, before we move on to our next little area that we're going to delve into, which is around operationalizing sustainability, there's an audience question that's come in for Lucie. So let me throw this question in for you, and don't hold your breath too long, Elham, but another question's coming for you after this one, but we'll start off with Lucie. So I've said that just to make you a little bit nervous and wonder what's coming next. So Lucie, how should smaller organizations who don't have large sustainability teams or resources best approach the upcoming reporting obligations?
Yeah, look, very good question, because I think it's a challenge when you don't have the resources to actually go, how am I going to tackle it? I think sort of what I said at the start, it is a disclosure regime. So at the end of the day, if something doesn't exist, you have no actual need to go and create it as long as you're meeting the minimum requirements of the standard. So you can go out there and say, we don't have this thing, we don't have KPIs linked to X, Y, Z, and that's okay. When you're looking at how you break it down, I think the earlier the better, because if you can sort of segment the work out and work out who internally is best placed to support if you don't have huge resources, the better. We have got, a number of clients who are facing into this for the first time. They've never done voluntary reporting before. And it is really about sort of going, okay, my ambition has to match my ability to meet that ambition. I can't go out there and go, I'm going to do this whiz-bang thing. I think there is also, for the first couple of years, probably a bit of an acknowledgement that everyone's on a curve here. As much as you might want to have everything in place for year one and it's amazing, if the reality is you're not going to get it over the line, you can say in your report, we are looking to do this in the future, but we don't have it in place right now. As long as you meet those minimum disclosure regimes, it doesn't have to be full bells and whistles all in one go, as long as it's minimum compliant.
Thanks, Lucie.
And what I might just add to what Lucie said, and again, reflecting on our Green Star performance rating tool, which is really for the operations of a building, that's effectively like the format of the rating tool, is to sort of lead people towards the improvement over time. So you start off with like a policy, do you have an organizational policy around this? And then do you have a plan? Have you implemented the plan? And then the demonstrated sort of data outcomes of that implementation. So it's okay that if on the first year you've only just got a policy or you've got that commitment to develop the policy. So yeah, it's just a recognition that a lot of these transitions require a lot of time and resources, and you plan that out well and just sort of show that commitment to that ongoing continuous improvement, then I think that's basically what we're trying to see as well. Recognizing though that we're in this emergency situation, we've got to go fast.
Yeah, and sorry, one thing I forgot to add quickly is just the standard itself does acknowledge that there is a spectrum of where people are going to be. So there are some where it's sort of saying, do you have the resources and the capability to do X or Y? And it's also has things around undue cost and effort. So it's not sort of expecting that if you're in the ASX 20 that you're going to have the same outcome as someone who's an unlisted smaller outfit.
So Elham, one of the questions that's come in is, what about the tenants? How are tenants influencing owners' sustainability strategies and Green Star uptake?
Yeah, I did forget to actually mention that earlier because a lot of this is actually driven by the tenants. So even if I sort of reflect on a few years ago, and let's just take industrial assets as an example, like previously not many would have pursued Green Star ratings, but there is such a huge demand from sort of tenants and customers that it is really it has very much led, for example, in that sector. I don't think you would find an industrial asset that's not really going for a Green Star rating. So I mean that's effectively been reflected in the sort of the projects that we've seen come through. Like previously, Green Star was very sort of office centric, but now we are seeing such a breadth in the different building types that are using Green Star. So a lot of that is driven through that sort of customer demand that they want to, have their employees, or they want to live, or whatever that is, in a building that is healthier, it's more resilient, it is efficient to run as well. So the tenants have a really important role to play within the rating tools. We've got different ways to try and have that engagement occur. There are some tenant specific sort of requirements. So within performance, for example, it's understood that in some cases, a lot of it is in the base building, but if you can demonstrate that you're actively engaging with your tenants as well, then you get incentivized and rewarded for that as well.
And as we've said in previous webinars, is that happy tenants stay,
Exactly,
happy tenants
yeah.
pay, and unhappy tenants will go. They will find a building that makes them happier, and when their time's up.
We've certainly seen a shift where tenants are being far more active, and part of that's come with the new reporting requirements they have around scope 2 and 3 emissions, and they're trying to understand that. And so there used to be a period where getting the information sharing between tenants and owners was really problematic. Now we're getting a lot of tenants who are asking for that information, requiring one of our largest clients in the US, a very large organization. A lot of their investment is driven by tenants and tenant requirements. So previously it was part of a ticket to play, and you talk about Green Star or neighbours, and they'd look at the kind of environment and say, does it meet our criteria? Now it's much more on a day-to-day basis. Show me what you're doing, give me reporting information, make sure I can be the company I want to be, by what is a very large investment for a tenant often, and a large part of their ESG profile is based on this, and we're seeing a big move in that direction.
So let's talk a little bit about operationalizing sustainability at that asset level. What are some of the practical initiatives at the building level that are proving most effective in helping owners meet their sustainability commitments?
Look, I think like what I sort of spoke about a little bit earlier was this sort of like this transition plans that need to that different buildings need to develop. So as part of that transition, and this is effectively what sustainable finance is really looking at as well, is that a plan that is articulating that pathway to net zero. So having a plan in place is really important. But as far as like what are some of the practical things that help project, or like will help a building, sorry, I'm in the Green Star mode, so I talk about projects, apologies, that will help a building demonstrate that. It's really things like even understanding. So I think, like the context of today, what we're talking a lot about is around the data and the information. Like if you don't know, for example, in your building, where, what aspects of your building, what system is using the most energy, then how do you know that that's what you should target? So having a really good, I guess, like metering and reporting framework in place, a strategy that's able to give you that information and then help you identify those improvements, and then is able to help you then track those improvements over time. And if there's something that occurs, you can then remediate and address that. I think that is probably one of um, the low hanging fruit, so to speak. From like a day-to-day point of view, there's obviously going to be lots of opportunities. When you have an energy efficiency plan, there will be the lower hanging fruit that you can do, that are the easy things to do, like your lighting upgrades and so on and so forth. But there can be some harder, deeper retrofits that I think will be more difficult over time, where it might mean that if you were trying to electrify your building, well, that's a deeper retrofit sort of issue. You've got to look about what, think about the spatial requirements and some of those other elements. So yes, but I think having like a good data strategy, or having like a good way to actually even collecting information and be able to analyze it, is probably one of the more practical ways that will mean not only that you're meeting your customer demands, but it's also saving you money in the long run. And this is, again, going back to the win-wins. This is a win-win.
So it's interesting because we keep going back to those same things around data, being able to turn data into actionable insight, into something you can do. Where's technology making the biggest difference in ensuring assets deliver against their sustainability obligations? Maybe, David, if you've got a concrete example from CIM's experience there?
Yeah, well, I guess there's three areas that I'd look at to start with. Obviously, technology is making a big difference across the board. Sometimes it's solving problems, sometimes it's causing problems, a bit of both. But there are kind of three areas that we like to think of. One is in transparency. And so one of the problems we talked about with data is not the availability of the data, it's making that accessible and being able to see and compare. So the marketplace of data within buildings is intentionally opaque. So many participants don't really want transparency. Some do, some don't. Some want to be compared, some don't want to be compared, some want to be accountable, some don't want to be accountable, and they're all in different systems. One of our clients has 80 different data systems that they're trying to feed into, that they're trying to resolve. And they're all, and by data systems, I mean, they're all completely different. They have different languages, different stored in different ways, accessed different ways, collected in different ways. So being able to turn that into something that technology can do to deal with that complexity and turn it into something so a person can see a single pane of glass or similar is a huge thing that technology can do. And just on its own, transparency drives behavior, because people will see good things happening, things that aren't so successful happening. Great people work in our industry. When they see that, they'll act. If they don't see it, they don't have to, and they might not even know. We have not yet met a person who runs a building who doesn't care about how well that building's run. But knowing what that is a really big thing that technology can do. The second's automation. A lot of activity that happens in the industry today is checking things that aren't broken, waiting for things to break and then checking them. There's a lot of things that have happened over time to build an industry that technology needs to be able to solve and make way more efficient. Great people shouldn't be with their heads under things, looking for things that could already be checked and already be seen, and that's only at the starting point. The last one I'd say with technology is to start to make things more predictable and more reliable. I should have a notion that when I buy a piece of equipment, where I do something, or when I build a building, I should very quickly get an idea of how that might perform over time and be able to track that. You mentioned before, Anthony, measure. You can't manage what you can't measure. Being able to have all of that is not just about dealing with today, it's about dealing with the future, and technology should help you do that. So I'll give you a concrete example. We have one of our clients, they now do about 2.5 billion automated checks a year. So that's going from a couple of thousand manual under a schedule, like a DA19 schedule, to now being checked wildly more often, and not just the same check, but much, much broader type checks. They're generating automated results. Not, we hate the term actionable insight, because that effectively says, here's a problem, I'm not going to tell you how to solve it. We're actually talking about solving things. So that's a concrete example of how, in our experience, you can make a big difference. And the other part of it is something that we, and that particular client does about 30,000 of those automated actions a year. So that's way more than people could do kind of on those buildings. But the last one is that what we're seeing a lot more of, and that we're leading into, is this thirst for data is only just starting. And so our clients are trying to ask us questions like, what's going to be the climate impact of that building in that microclimate in that future? You know, these types of things it's that whole thing about data, is that once you start getting it and that turns into information, it creates new questions and new value, and then you've got to feed that as well. And so that's something that we see technology's role is to be the provider of things, not just on its own, but for other activities that operators might want to have.
Thanks for that, David. Elham, I've got a question from the audience, and I'm hoping this is just a yes/no question so that we can kind of keep moving through and make sure that we deliver as much value as we can through the webinar. But the question is, does the GBCA have any SLL partners?
Look, we work across different sort of banks. It's more that different banks might, I think if I'm understanding the question right, they will reference Green Star. So I'll use an example, like Green Star Homes is a program that's specifically for residential houses. Commonwealth Bank came out with I guess a sustainable link loan. Like it recognized Green Star Homes. It said if you have a Green Star Homes rating, then you get a discount. So we have that not only we do have it with a number of the major banks. So I think that's answering the question. So in short, yes. And there's a couple of examples there.
Thanks.
Understand.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Lucie, you work as a sustainability consultant across lots of different industries. You see lots of commitments that depend on operational performance. But from that experience, what lessons can the property sector take from other industries about bridging that gap between what the boardroom says and the day-to-day delivery?
Yeah, look, I'd say firstly, what's pleasing, I'd say to see, is it's not that we've seen a consolidation for people just going, we can't do all these things and we're going to have less commitments. But we've definitely seen, I'd say, a concerted effort across a number of industries to have fewer but more meaningful commitments that really do go to that operational level. I'd say on climate, we're still probably not at the best end of the spectrum, but mining in general has a lot more effective link between the board and the governance layer and the operational impacts, partly because they've had to with things like health and safety and, cultural incidents and environmental incidents, etc. So there's the sort of difference I'd say there than some other industries is it's not just let's get this data and report it once annually. It's ongoing management conversations around the KPIs, being held to account on them, having appetites set for them in like a risk appetite statement or similar, so that there's an actual linkage between that top level commitment and the actual action and being held to account on achieving it. I think, David, when you're talking about like property managers and property owners know their buildings really well, they're often doing the stuff at their layer and they're not ever linking what they're doing to the group level or business level commitment or portfolio level commitment. They don't think in that way. And it's not necessarily their job, but having the insights and the frameworks internally so that those insights can be linked, I think is something where, that sort of much more broad management reporting, KPIs ongoing, holding people account, having conversations about things, not just giving someone a piece of paper that says, we're reporting okay here, but actually sort of people truly understanding that linkage from that top level down.
We see
Thanks for that, Lucie. Yeah,
two other areas. One is one of the industries that we follow to as kind of what we might call a kind of bellwether industry for infrastructure is airlines. And airlines got into a lot of what you might call ESG more for financial risk matters. Most airlines in the world, if you're as old as me, were going broke, and they had to do something about being more sustainable as assets. And so they did a lot of the things that are happening in buildings today. And there's a lot of similarities. A large commercial building costs about the same as an airline. It has about the same amount of equipment, uses about the same amount of energy. It does a lot of these types of things. And so they were able to build in systems. Now, for them, a byproduct of that is also contributing to other parts of their ESG and other goals. So we're seeing those industries go further and further to new systems that are about results. They're not about inputs. So a lot of the industry has been around inputs. Like if I turn up every day, that means the building will run better. Well, it won't actually. You have to do something and create a result for the building to be better. We see that as being a kind of alignment that's happening in sustainability from that kind of industry. But this sort of top-down approach that Lucie mentioned, I think is really important, because at a ground level, what we will see is in two pieces of equipment that are identical, they should have the same profile as a piece of equipment, will perform wildly differently based on how they're operated by the people and by the systems that are in place in those organizations. Where that inconsistency is removed is where there's a top-down approach to, this is the standards we're trying to meet. This is how we're going to show that people need to meet these standards. And what you see is people are kind of lifting up because they know the purpose of doing that extra work. They know the purpose of focusing on something differently, and they'll visibly see how that impacts as part of that process. People will lead to it if they can see the purpose for doing that, and we see a lot more of that happening.
Thanks for that. Pardon me. Look, it's really interesting. We've got a few more questions, and we do have a handful of audience questions, which I'm going to try to get to after we've covered these next couple of things that I wanted to look at. But we want to look ahead a little bit. With the rise in prominence of rating systems, where do you think the sector is most vulnerable to future non-compliance?
Thank you for that question. So, I mean, I thought it was a nice segue, David. So like one of the areas I think, like, couple of things, a couple of thoughts. So firstly, an area or a risk would be around if the rating tool and system isn't actually evolving and keeping up with sort of changing standards over time. So that could be one area. The other area would be if there's a gap in a particular, as buildings get more complex. So for example, like data centers, if they're not adequately able to verify the performance of those new sort of asset classes, that's another gap. But I think one of the main things is really, and it goes back to really the essence of a lot of what we've talked about today, is around having like verifiable data that's actually able to be audited and tracked. That's definitely a gap. Having a certification scheme that has that independence within it means that, so to David's point, that if that is an aspiration that's established, then the systems and the processes within are developed to be able to demonstrate and meet that. Whereas if that's not the case and you're just sort of doing self-reporting or some sort of self-certification, then that reliability is reduced and that increases the risk. So I would sort of say having good, reliable data metrics that has been audited are really fundamentals to a well-functioning, because ultimately it's around trying to demonstrate performance.
I'd say, just add one thing, the area where you create a significantly increased risk of non-compliance is where your measurement of data is very lagging. And so you end up in a situation where you might get a neighbour's rating or a Green Star rating and it's down. And I know that after the end of the period. What do I do about that now? So the risk of non-compliance is really high when you don't measure things early, do leading indicators so you can address them through the period. Then the non-compliance becomes, by its nature, much, much less likely to happen.
It's that data again. Look ahead, use it to predict and stop the problems before they happen. So Lucie, just as a last question, and I'll see if we can get to a couple of audience questions as well. Given your focus on reporting and assurance, what do you see as the next evolution in green finance and disclosure? And how should property owners in our region prepare for that?
Look, I think, green finance isn't only set to increase, but at the same time, we are seeing, taxonomies develop. The Treasury Department's just closed its consultation on the sustainable finance labeling. So we're going to see probably a bit of a tightening. It's not an evolution, but it'll be a consolidation of this is what we mean by green or sustainable. So it's going to be a lot more prescriptive. And that's going to be a piece where, to prepare for that in a way, seeking Green Star or other certifications where you can get that alignment makes it a lot easier for you in that environment to access that financing. So really it's that sort of consolidation. We're going to have much more prescriptive terms in some ways, globally, nationally as well, on what's meant by certain things. Look, I don't want to downplay the amount of effort that's going to need to go into getting to 2030 when all the companies that are captured under legislation are going to have to report to a reasonable assurance level. I'd say the piece to prepare for now is, okay, we've got a couple of years where we're doing limited assurance over certain sections of the requirements. The burden of proof is a lot lower there. Getting to an environment where you can have controls around your data audited, everything you're saying can be audited to a reasonable level, is a significant effort. And I think the earlier you can prepare and the earlier you can sort of build some of that into what you're doing, the better. Creating a control environment around the data that you're using, the disclosures you're making, so that you are sort of in the best place possible. Because I think it's going to be a bit of a shock for some people when they get to that point where historically we have had voluntary sustainability reporting, so people have been able to pick and choose what they want to say. That's not going to be the case anymore. And so that comes with it a lot of risk of having, an auditor's opinion like ours come out and say that there's some negative statements on there because they've failed to meet some of the requirements.
Just while you've got the virtual talking stick, Lucie, I want to throw an audience question at you. Are lower energy rated buildings desired by SLL financiers because there's room to move, so those buildings can get better? Or is it the other way around where they prefer to finance higher energy rated buildings because they're already there? Have you got
It's a difficult question because it's going to depend on what they're actually using as their own metrics. I think if they're taking a portfolio approach and they're saying, if we're looking at commercial property as a whole, we want to get our entire portfolio down, they're not going to necessarily just go for high so that they can go down. That would kind of defeat the purpose. I think they're going to be looking for new opportunities that can help decarbonize their existing portfolio. But I think it's going to be a little bit of it depends. I think ideally I'd say, well, you'd be going for the better quality ones to manage your risk, but there might be some who do look for opportunities to help clients. And it's not about trying to decarbonize, but to really say there's an opportunity here. We think you've got, with the right financing, with the right support, you can decarbonize. But yeah, I mean, every finance is going to be looking at this different.
That's great. And one very last question. We've got about 90 seconds or so up our sleeves. And this could be either Lucie or David. How can a project or an investor or a client apply for sustainable finance? Are there minimum requirements which make them eligible? Is this might need an essay afterwards kind of answer, or?
Probably. I think, the banks are all looking at different opportunities. So it depends on what you're looking to achieve in terms of what they're actually matching to their goals as well. I think there are some general principles. They may not be fully taxonomy aligned yet, given it's only just come out, but they will be looking at aligning to that. So I think generally I'd say the taxonomy is a fairly good reference point in terms of activities that would be likely to be something that could be subject to a sustainability linked loan. But, there's a spectrum out there. And David, if you've got a different...
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of plug. I mean, Green Building Council's come out with a recent report in concert with a large financial institution, which talks about some of the things they're trying to achieve and what financiers are looking for. In Australia, there are a large number of sustainability linked loan providers, much more than there were even 12 months ago, let alone a few years ago. And so most of them will have areas that are there, but those kind of guides that, like the Green Building Council's guide, sort of set out, these are the kind of things that they'll fund, these are the kind of things that they're looking to do. What you will find is that the reporting obligations, as Lucie said, they're not all high. There are inexpensive things that you can do. There are things you can report along the way. It's not that you have to have a massive building that has everything already in place to get a sustainability linked loan. Lots of them are not like that. Some of them are about improvement. So there's pretty open, but there are guides that are there. But each bank provides a document on the kind of things they're looking for, and financiers. And so you can work with them and get some of that information.
Thank you very much, everybody. We are 15 seconds over time, so I'm a bit mindful of everyone's time today. I want to make sure that everyone gets off on time. I was hoping to see the poll results. Let's see if those are available. So hopefully our friends might put those up for us. Here we go. So just very quickly, so the question was, over the next 5 years, where's the property sector most at risk of falling short on ESG? So we had 24 respondents, and it looks like technology adoption and data readiness and climate disclosure compliance are two of our top answers. But the number one is actually asset resilience to climate impact, which is really interesting. So a third of the people who responded came up with that as an answer. And I find it interesting that meeting tenant and investor expectations was kind of at the lower end of the spectrum there as well, and access to sustainable finance. Well, it's a pretty interesting smattering there, and I hope that's given our panelists a little bit of insight as to what people are thinking out in our audience today. But with that, I just want to thank everybody for their time. Thank you to David, Elham, and Lucie for their time today. It's been a great conversation. As most people who are listening in would be aware, there is some preparation that goes on behind the scenes, but it was great because everyone kind of jumped in and had a crack at everything. So it wasn't, I always hate having scripted spontaneity. I like it when people actually get into the conversation and engage with each other. So we've been able to achieve that today, which I think has been wonderful and made this a far more interesting webinar than just someone throwing questions out into the ether and hoping for the best. But with that, thank you to everybody who's attended today. If you are watching this on the recording afterwards, thanks for doing that as well. We really do appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing all of you at our next webinar. Thanks very much.